The desert air carried a stillness that was almost unbearable, the kind that pressed into the skin and made every movement feel heavier than it was. Heat shimmered off the sand like liquid glass, bending the horizon until the distant ridgelines wavered and shifted as though alive. Sergeant Lyra Navarro lay flat against the dune, the barrel of her sniper rifle resting steady across the bipod, the butt pressed firmly into her shoulder. Her breath was slow, deliberate, each inhale dragged through the cloth of her balaclava to keep from stirring the sand. She had been here for nearly 3 hours, unmoving, her muscles burning with a quiet ache that no amount of discipline could erase. But her eyes never wavered from the scope, from the single dark silhouette moving faintly against the pale walls of the fortress in the distance. The fortress had been deemed impenetrable, a citadel carved into the rock with firing slits instead of windows, concrete thick enough to shrug off artillery, and guard towers positioned to catch any approach. And inside that fortress sat the warlord who had bled this entire region dry, who had made every diplomatic attempt meaningless, who had slaughtered his own people to maintain control. Command had already deemed a ground assault suicidal. Aircraft had been shot down by the fortress's anti-air batteries before they could even line up a strike. The man was untouchable, they said. Until now. Lyra adjusted her scope a fraction of a millimeter. Her target was nothing more than a fleeting shadow beyond reinforced glass, a figure who only appeared at irregular intervals, sometimes for seconds, sometimes for minutes, never long enough for a traditional sniper to attempt a shot. But Lyra was not traditional. She had been called reckless, obsessive, even insane by some of her fellow soldiers. Yet she was also the only one who had ever consistently made shots others called impossible. Her instructors in the program had learned it quickly never to say that word around her. To Lyra, impossible was nothing more than a dare. Behind her, the comms crackled softly, the general's voice measured but heavy with doubt. Sergeant Navarro, report. Lyra lowered her cheek fractionally, keeping her eye in the scope, finger resting but not pressing the trigger. Target window remains irregular. Visibility compromised by glare at this hour. Waiting for confirmation. There was a pause, and though the general did not sigh, Lyra could feel the weight of his hesitation bleeding through the channel. He had not wanted her here. To him, sniping was precise mathematics, cold calculation, and dependable repetition. But to Lyra it was rhythm, instinct, and something that lived beyond the numbers. The general had resisted authorizing this mission for days, insisting no human alive could punch a bullet across nearly 2 miles of burning desert air, through wind shear and thermal distortion, to strike a target who barely exposed himself for seconds at a time behind armored glass. You're gambling with the lives of everyone on this operation, he had told her flatly. And yet, here she was, flat against the sand, every nerve stretched taut with anticipation, her reputation hanging in the balance. She didn't care about the general's doubts. What mattered was that she had seen the man in her scope. And if she could see him, she could hit him. The hours dragged with unbearable slowness, punctuated only by the occasional movement within the fortress. Once, the warlord had stepped close enough to the window that Lyra's finger nearly tightened against the trigger, only for him to retreat before her calculations had settled. She did not curse, did not let the frustration break the perfect stillness of her body. She simply reset, recalculated, and waited again. Sweat gathered beneath her armor, trickling down her spine, itching against her skin, but she ignored it. Her breathing was a steady tide. Her heart rate was a metronome. Patience was as vital a weapon as the rifle itself. Somewhere far behind her position, the rest of her unit remained in cover, waiting for the strike that would signal their next move. No one spoke to her anymore. They knew better. The moment required silence. The desert wind shifted, and Lyra adjusted again, fingertips making microscopic turns on the windage knob of her scope. She had studied this stretch of desert for weeks, learning its peculiar rhythms, how the morning thermals bent one way and the evening ones another, how heat radiating off the rock faces created pockets of rising turbulence invisible to the naked eye. Her mind mapped them all like a chessboard. This was not luck. This was preparation. And yet, when the shadow returned at the window, her pulse still spiked. It was him. The warlord's form shifted into view, distorted by the thickness of reinforced glass but still clear enough that Lyra could see the faint glint of his rings when he raised a hand to gesture at someone outside her line of sight. She let her breath settle. Her finger curled fractionally against the trigger, tightening but not yet breaking. This was not a simple matter of aiming at the man's chest and pulling. At this distance, through this glass, the bullet would need to arc perfectly, factoring in wind, heat distortion, gravity drop, and even the microsecond delay in his movement. She was not just shooting at a target, she was shooting at the idea of where the target would exist by the time the bullet reached it. The margin for error was less than a human hair. A voice murmured through her earpiece, hushed but urgent. "Navarro, you can't make that shot." She recognized the tone. Not the general this time. One of the spotters, maybe Ramirez. But she ignored it. She had already tuned the world down to one thin line, a straight thread connecting her eye, her rifle, and the faint outline in the glass. She let the air fill her lungs halfway, held it, and pressed the trigger. The crack was subdued by the suppressor, but in her head it was deafening. The recoil kissed her shoulder, soft and familiar. For a moment, there was nothing, no sound, no movement, no result. The bullet was still traveling, cutting through layers of air, bending slightly along the invisible currents she had already mapped. The fortress stood unchanged, its walls unbroken, the figure still half-turned as if in mid-gesture. The spotter's voice hissed again, low and certain. "Missed. I told you." But Lyra's eye remained fixed in the scope. She knew better than to look away. And then, like a shadow folding into itself, the man's head snapped backward, a spray of dark across the reinforced glass that even its thickness could not contain. The figure collapsed, and the fortress erupted in chaos. Voices exploded in her comms. Some disbelieving, some triumphant. But the only one she waited for was the general. The silence on his end stretched long enough that Lyra finally lifted her cheek from the rifle and glanced back over her shoulder, her face hidden behind the mask but her expression calm. Finally, his voice came through, low and stunned. "Impossible," he paused, then exhaled into the channel, almost a laugh though heavy with something like awe. "You actually struck the target." Lyra closed her eyes briefly, not in celebration but in quiet acknowledgement. To her, it had never been about proving him wrong. It had been about proving that no distance, no glass, no fortress could protect a tyrant from the precision of a bullet guided by her hands. Around her, the desert remained unchanged, the horizon still shimmering, the heat still pressing down. But everything had shifted. The warlord was dead. The fortress would fall. And the general, for the first time, had seen what she had always known. Nothing was truly impossible, not when she was behind the scope. The fortress walls erupted with gunfire as the warlord's guards scrambled in chaos, their discipline shattered by the sudden death of the man they had considered untouchable. From her position in the dunes, Lyra watched through her scope as soldiers shouted orders, some rushing to secure the inner chamber, others spreading across the parapets with their rifles raised toward the horizon, searching desperately for the source of the shot. They had no idea where it had come from. At 2 miles out, the crack of her suppressed rifle would have dissolved into the desert air, the sound arriving so late and scattered by the wind that it was impossible to trace. To them, their leader had simply been struck by fate itself. But Lyra knew it would not take long before they began sweeping the desert with binoculars, drones, and heavy optics. She rolled her shoulder to ease the ache that had been building for hours, her mind already moving to the next step. Taking the shot had only been half the mission. Surviving it would be the other half. The comms were a storm of voices, some cheering, some asking for orders, others reporting enemy movement. Through the clamor, the general's tone finally cut clean, clipped and decisive. "Navarro, extraction route Delta is live. Do not linger. Units Bravo and Echo will advance once confirmation of the kill is broadcast. You've opened the door, Sergeant, now get out before they close it on you." Lyra gave no verbal response, only a click of her comms mic to acknowledge. Words wasted seconds. She slid the rifle down, disassembled it with quick, practiced motions, each piece vanishing into the lined compartments of her pack. The desert was already alive with enemy spotlights sweeping across the dunes. Staying prone would only get her pinned. She had to move now, low and fast. She adjusted her scarf, pulled the hood over her helmet, and began crawling, her knees and elbows digging into the sand until she was beyond the ridge of her original perch. From there, she rose into a crouch and darted across the open expanse, every motion measured, every pause perfectly timed with the sweeps of light. Behind her, the fortress had become a hive of rage. Sirens wailed, harsh and metallic, echoing across the barren land. Searchlights stabbed outward, jagged spears of white across the darkness, but they stretched far short of her position. Still, the men within those walls would not stop. Drones would launch soon, fast and merciless. Lyra kept her pace steady, conserving energy. The desert was a vast shield if she respected its rules: stay low, stay quiet, and never run in straight lines where heat shimmer betrayed movement. Her boots pressed deep into the shifting sand, leaving tracks that the wind would erase within minutes, but she knew better than to rely on nature to cover her trail. She veered toward the shadow of a low escarpment, tucking herself against the stone just as a new wave of searchlights cut across the area she had vacated moments before. Timing had saved her again. She pressed her back to the stone, breathing shallow, listening. The comms were alive with orders she only half heard. The general was directing squads to their staging points, setting the full offensive into motion now that the warlord was confirmed dead. But amidst the controlled chaos, a voice broke through, tight with concern. Ramirez again. Lyra, status? You clear. She tapped her MIC once, no words. Silence was her answer. She moved again. The extraction point was 3 kilometers east, marked by a dry riverbed that twisted through the desert like a scar. From there, a camouflaged transport would carry her to safety while the rest of the operation unfolded. But 3 kilometers in open desert, under the eye of a fortress in full alarm, was not a short distance. Lyra slid down into a shallow depression, scanning the horizon. Dust plumes rose in the distance, armored vehicles deploying, patrols sent out in wide sweeps. They would comb every dune until they believed themselves safe again. She had minutes, maybe less, before their net tightened. Her mind ticked through possibilities with the same precision she had used to calculate her impossible shot. Straight to the riverbed was fastest but most exposed. Skirting through the rocky escarpments was safer but would add distance, risking that the extraction window would close. She adjusted her pack straps, checked the pistol holstered at her thigh, then chose the middle path. Speed balanced with cover. It had always been her way. The first drone appeared sooner than expected, a faint hum against the desert quiet that prickled the back of her neck. She dropped flat, pressing her body against the sand, pulling her hood tighter to break her outline. The drone's searchlight swept methodically, casting harsh cones of light across the dunes. Lyra counted the rhythm, the sweep arcs, the moments of overlap. She timed her breathing with the gaps, only moving when the beam had passed, freezing when it returned. Twice the light skimmed so close she could see the sand sparkle faintly under its glare, but she remained motionless, heartbeat steady, muscles locked in iron discipline. The drone moved on, drifting toward the horizon. Only then did she crawl forward, teeth grit against the sting of hot sand scraping her gloves. She would not be seen. Not now. Her thoughts returned briefly to the general. His voice after the shot had lingered in her mind, heavy with disbelief. He had doubted her, doubted the very idea of the mission, and yet in the end, he had sounded almost reverent. It did not matter to her whether he respected her or not. What mattered was the mission, the fact that a tyrant who had enslaved thousands lay dead because she had chosen to take the impossible shot. But still, there was a flicker of something in her chest she would not name, a strange satisfaction that even the most rigid of commanders had been forced to acknowledge what she had done. She pushed the thought aside. Satisfaction was a distraction. She still had ground to cover, still had survival to secure. Reflection could come later, if later existed at all. The desert floor began to change beneath her as she approached the edge of the dry riverbed, the sand giving way to cracked clay and jagged rock. She crouched low, scanning, every sense on edge. The air was alive with distant engines now, the armored patrols sweeping wide arcs. Their headlights bounced across the horizon, moving closer. She slipped into the shadow of a rock outcropping and pulled her canteen, taking the barest sip of warm water to wet her throat. Her tongue felt like sandpaper, her lips cracked from hours of stillness under the desert heat, but she allowed herself no more than a taste. Hydration slowed movement. She capped the canteen and moved again, sliding down into the dry riverbed just as a patrol crested the ridge a kilometer behind her. She was invisible for the moment. But not for long. The extraction signal was faint but steady, a low-frequency ping audible only through her comms. She followed it like a lodestar, weaving through the winding channel of the riverbed, her boots crunching against brittle stone. Every sound felt amplified, too. Loud, but she forced herself not to rush. The transport would not risk exposure if she arrived early or late. Timing was absolute. She rounded a bend, and there it was, a camouflaged vehicle tucked beneath a netting of sand-colored mesh, its engine silent, its crew masked and waiting. Relief should have come then, but instead Lyra felt her chest tighten. The distance between her and the transport was 100 meters of open ground. No cover. Nothing but starlight and sand. And above, the distant hum of a second drone. Her earpiece crackled. Navarro, this is Delta Team. We see you. Move now. Repeat, move now, windows closing. She crouched low, scanning the sky. The drone's searchlight was angling toward the riverbed, its path inevitably sweeping her position. She had seconds, maybe less, before its gaze pinned her in place. She drew a slow breath, exhaled, and sprinted. Every stride was agony, her legs burning from hours of stillness, but she drove herself forward, arms pumping, boots hammering against the dry earth. The drone's light flared across the bend behind her, spilling forward. Shouts erupted in the distance, patrols spotting movement. Bullets cracked against stone, ricochets sparking the ground around her. She did not look back. She dove the last meters, rolling beneath the camo netting as hands pulled her inside. The transport's engine roared to life, gears grinding as it lurched forward, tires spitting dust into the night. She collapsed against the metal floor, chest heaving, every nerve on fire, but her eyes remained sharp. Survival was never guaranteed. Only earned. The general's voice returned to the comms, louder now, barking orders to the advancing units as the transport sped away. But for the first time, when he spoke her name, it carried no doubt, no hesitation. Only command, and beneath it, respect. Sergeant Navarro. Well done. The impossible has been done. Now let's finish this war. She leaned her head back against the rattling metal wall, closing her eyes for a fleeting second, allowing the rhythm of the engine to wash over her. She had struck the target, survived the escape, and now the battle belonged to the rest of them. For her, the night was not over, but for the first time, it felt like victory was within reach. The transport jolted violently as it tore across the uneven desert, the suspension groaning under the strain of each hidden ridge and crater. Lyra braced herself against the metal wall, her rifle still disassembled in her pack, every muscle tight with the instinct that the ride wasn't safe yet. The fortress was still alive behind them, and though their engines roared louder than they should have, she knew the sound was already masked by the chaos of the battleground. Armored patrols were sweeping out from the stronghold, drones combing the skies, but the desert was vast and, for the moment, the night was on their side. Across from her sat two members of Delta Team, faces obscured by desert masks, rifles cradled in their hands as their eyes flicked between her and the horizon. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. In the silence of soldiers who understood the stakes, the only sound was the rumble of the engine and the rattle of loose equipment bouncing with each impact. Minutes stretched like hours. The driver swerved suddenly, sending the transport into a sharp slide before correcting, dust spraying through gaps in the netting. Lyra felt the change immediately. Pursuit. She twisted, pulling back the mesh curtain to peer out into the darkness. Headlights burned faintly in the distance, a formation of armored trucks barreling after them, the ground vibrating faintly with their weight. She dropped the curtain, voice calm but sharp. 2 clicks back. They've seen us. The Delta Team soldier beside her tapped his earpiece, murmured into the channel. The driver cursed under his breath, downshifting, pushing the engine harder. But Lyra knew the math. Their vehicle was fast, light, built for stealth. Theirs were heavier, but with more fuel and armor. They would not outrun them forever. The general's voice cut across the comms again, sharper now. Delta, hold course to Rendezvous Echo. You'll link at Sector 7, crossfire them there. Sergeant Navarro, stay alive until then. Lyra suppressed a dry laugh. As if survival was a matter of waiting politely. The desert was already growing tighter, the open plain giving way to ridges and broken rock that created choke points both sides could use. She adjusted her gloves, her fingers brushing the sidearm holstered at her thigh. Her rifle was in pieces, too slow to reassemble in a bouncing truck under pursuit. For now, the pistol and whatever they carried on board would have to do. The first shell landed close enough that the ground shook beneath them, a plume of fire and dirt rising into the night. Shrapnel clattered against the side of the transport. The driver swore, jerking the wheel, weaving hard left as another shell tore into the sand behind them. Mortars, one of the Delta soldiers spat. They're bracketing us. Lyra steadied her breath, leaning forward. They're not firing blind. They've got aerial eyes. The confirmation came seconds later when the hum of another drone sliced through the sky, louder now, hovering directly above their fleeing vehicle. Its camera blinked faintly red in the dark, painting their escape with perfect precision for the gunners behind. Without hesitation, Lyra yanked open one of the metal crates bolted to the floor. Inside, nestled among spare mags and field rations, was a tube launcher, compact but deadly. She slid it free, the Delta soldiers glancing at her with the kind of recognition soldiers give to someone who doesn't ask permission in the middle of chaos. She braced it against her shoulder, thumbed the safety, and waited for the right arc. The drone dipped low, its red eye locking onto them like a predator. She exhaled, triggered, and the launcher spat fire. The missile streaked upward, a blazing arc that kissed the drone head-on, shredding it in a blossom of sparks and twisted metal. The night went dark above them again. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the armored trucks behind opened fire with their mounted guns, tracers ripping the darkness in searing lines. The rounds chewed into the sand on both sides, spitting fire as they closed the gap. One round tore across the side panel of the transport, punching a ragged hole inches from Lyra's shoulder. The driver swore again, sweat dripping down his temple, knuckles white on the wheel. "We can't take much more of this," he barked. The comms lit up as Echo Squad reported their position, already setting up the kill zone ahead. The general's orders came sharp, unwavering: hold them into the channel. "Navarro, if you've got something left to throw at them, now's the time." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She was already pulling the pieces of her rifle from the pack, her fingers moving faster than thought, assembly drilled into her bones from 1,000 repetitions. The Delta soldiers looked at her like she was insane, trying to prep a sniper rifle in the back of a rattling, swerving truck, but she ignored them. The sections clicked together, bolt slid home, scope locked. She braced herself against the open side hatch, leaned out into the rushing wind, and pressed her cheek against the stock. The world slowed. The rattling transport, the deafening gunfire, the blinding streaks of tracer rounds, all of it faded into the tunnel of her scope. The lead truck's gunner loomed large, body half out of the hatch, spraying fire across the desert. Lyra didn't count the sway of her own vehicle. She became it, letting the motion fold into her calculation, breathing in the rhythm of the engine's growl. She squeezed the trigger once. The gunner's head snapped back, body crumpling into the vehicle. Before the second gunner could adjust, she shifted, fired again. The round punched clean, and he dropped. The convoy faltered, tracers scattering wild. The Delta soldiers shouted, rallying, their own rifles joining the fight. The transport swerved again, dust blinding the trailing trucks, buying precious seconds. Through her scope, Lyra saw the ridge ahead, narrow, jagged walls on both sides, a natural funnel. Echo Squad would be waiting there, heavy weapons set to ambush. All they needed was to drag the enemy into the throat. The transport roared toward it, bullets still chasing, but the timing was aligning, the kind of brutal rhythm war sometimes gifted. She pulled back, ducked inside, and secured the rifle, every nerve burning with adrenaline. The driver shouted over the chaos. "Hold tight, we hit the kill box in 30 seconds. The seconds were endless. Gunfire thundered around them, shells still bursting too close, dirt raining onto their roof. Then they tore through the mouth of the ridge. On the far side, shadows shifted, the glint of Echo Squad's positions lighting up as rockets streaked overhead, slamming into the first of the armored trucks. The convoy choked, explosions ripping through the narrow pass, vehicles slamming into each other as Echo's crossfire shredded them from the cliffs. The sky lit with fire, smoke billowing upward in choking plumes. Lyra watched it unfold with clinical detachment, her pulse finally easing as the tide turned. The transport skidded to a halt behind Echo's line, dust choking the air. The Delta team piled out, dragging crates of ammo to reinforce the defense. Lyra slid from the vehicle, her boots crunching against rock, the smell of cordite thick in the air. For the first time since taking her shot at the fortress, she allowed herself to breathe fully, deeply. The general's voice crackled across the comms, steady but edged with satisfaction. "Navarro. You bought us the gap we needed. The fortress is blind, its master is dead, and their pursuit is broken. We push from here." Lyra said nothing, only reloaded, checked her scope, and scanned the horizon. The war was not over. The fortress still had men, still had guns, still had defenses that would bleed her comrades. But a crack had been opened tonight. A tyrant was dead. A myth of invincibility had been shattered. And the general, though he would never admit it plainly, had staked the success of this entire operation on the shot she had been told was impossible. Now, as firelight painted the desert in shifting gold and black, she felt the weight of what came next. She had delivered death at a distance no one thought reachable. But survival, she knew, would demand something even harder. The smoke from the ambush clung to the desert air like a shroud, thick and acrid, stinging the eyes and coating the tongue with the taste of burnt metal and fuel. The echoes of the explosions still rolled through the canyon walls, but the gunfire had subsided into silence. What remained were the crackle of flames and the distant groans of twisted steel. Echo Squad moved methodically, clearing the wreckage, dragging wounded enemies into piles, disarming weapons left scattered across the ground. It was efficient, practiced work, the kind of aftermath soldiers learned to conduct with little emotion. But for Lyra, there was no pause. Her rifle was already shouldered again, the scope sweeping across the horizon, scanning for signs of reinforcements. The desert gave nothing away, only the shimmer of heat still rising in faint waves and the long stretch of shadow as the moon shifted higher. But her instincts refused to let her relax. The fortress was a beast that would not die quietly. The general's voice arrived in her earpiece with the steadiness of command. Bravo and Echo will consolidate. Delta returns with Navarro. Our priority is breaching the fortress before dawn. With their leader gone, their coordination will fracture, but we cannot give them time to recover. Lyra felt the subtle shift in his tone now, a weight that hadn't been there before. Where before he had doubted, now there was an undercurrent of trust, an unspoken acknowledgement of what she had accomplished. Yet trust did not soften orders, nor did it ease the reality that what lay ahead would be even more dangerous than what had passed. She clicked her MIC once in acknowledgement, then slid down the ridge to rejoin Delta Team at the transport. As they regrouped, Ramirez finally broke the silence between them. His voice was tight, but laced with a kind of awe he couldn't hide. I saw it through the feed. The shot. You really did it. She glanced at him briefly, her expression unreadable behind the mask, then looked back at the horizon. It was there to be taken. He shook his head slightly, almost a laugh. You make it sound like pulling a trigger on a paper target. But he didn't push further. Soldiers learned quickly that some acts defied explanation, and some operators preferred their silence to admiration. He tightened the strap on his helmet and moved back to his squad, leaving her with her stillness. The transport was battered from the chase, its panels riddled with dents and holes, but it still roared to life when the driver coaxed it forward. The convoy rolled east, carrying the fractured remnants of their momentum. Lyra sat again against the cold steel, her rifle across her lap, her body still coiled tight with vigilance. Each turn of the wheel rattled the frame, each bump reminded her of the fragility of their situation. They were a force moving deeper into hostile ground, chasing the corpse of a tyrant into the belly of his fortress. Her shot had cut off the head of the serpent, but its coils still writhed, and she knew better than most that desperation often drove enemies to their most dangerous extremes. The desert night grew colder as they advanced, the heat bleeding out of the sand until the air bit with a chill that settled in the bones. Soldiers shifted uncomfortably, tugging scarves tighter, blowing into their hands. To Lyra, the cold was welcome. Heat warped air, distorted vision, turned precision into guesswork. Cold steadied the world, cleared the haze, made lines sharper. But the cold also carried sound farther, and in the distance, she heard the unmistakable low rumble of engines, different from their own, heavier, deeper. She tapped the side of the transport and pointed east. The driver slowed, the convoy halting. Silence spread, the kind that thickened the air until every breath felt too loud. Then, faint but undeniable, headlights flared against the dark horizon. Armored reinforcements. At least 4 carriers, their shapes cutting hard against the flat line of desert. They weren't chasing. They were waiting, positioned directly along the route to the fortress. A blockade. Lyra slid from the transport, dropping to one knee as she lifted the scope. Through the glass she saw them clearly now, soldiers digging in, heavy machine guns mounted atop vehicles, barrels already angled toward their direction. The enemy wasn't retreating into the fortress. They were expanding outward, determined to bleed the attackers before they could even reach the walls. The general's voice crackled in, grim but unwavering. Echo, Delta, prepare to breach through. Navarro, I need eyes on their weak point. She adjusted her scope, sweeping across the formation. The blockade was disciplined, staggered to cover arcs, but she noted the positioning of their heavy weapons, the angle of their carriers. A pattern revealed itself, subtle but fatal. Their flank, the leftmost vehicle, was parked slightly higher on uneven ground, exposing the fuel lines beneath. If that line ruptured under fire, it would chain react through the cluster. She keyed the comms. Left flank. Carrier 3. Hit its belly, and they fold. The general didn't question her. He simply gave the order. Echo squad shifted into position, heavy launchers rising against the night. When the first missile streaked out, the blockade roared awake. Traces lit the sky, the desert alive with the fury of both sides colliding. The missile struck exactly where Lyra had called, directly beneath the exposed carrier. The explosion tore upward in a fireball, flipping the vehicle and igniting its fuel. The chain reaction was instant. Flames leapt from one to the next, heat waves battering the desert air as soldiers scrambled in panic. The blockade collapsed in less than a minute, the survivors scattering into the dark, their discipline shattered. Delta's transport surged forward, tearing through the smoldering wreckage. Lyra watched through her scope, her finger brushing the trigger but never needing to fire. The opening had been created, and the fortress loomed closer now, its jagged silhouette carved black against the stars. For the first time, she saw its walls clearly, towering slabs of concrete, reinforced with steel, lined with murder holes and mounted guns. It was less a building than a scar in the earth, designed to defy every assault, to outlast every siege. And yet, tonight, it had already been wounded. Its master was dead. Its blockade shattered. But its teeth still gleamed sharp. Inside the transport, silence gave way to nervous murmurs. Soldiers checked gear, tightened straps, whispered fragments of prayers. Even hardened veterans felt the weight of approaching a fortress that had claimed so many lives before. Lyra sat apart, her rifle balanced across her knees, her gaze steady. She did not fear the walls themselves. Walls could not think. Walls could not predict. It was the men behind those walls who mattered, and they were already broken. She had broken them when she took the impossible shot. All that remained now was to finish the work. The general's voice came again, low but heavy with intent. We breach at dawn. Navarro, you will take high position on the south ridge. Your eyes will guide the assault. Without your precision, we will bleed out there. Lyra nodded once, though no one saw it. She understood. Her rifle had already rewritten the battlefield once tonight. It would need to do so again. She leaned back against the metal, closed her eyes for the first time in hours, and let the rhythm of the transport carry her. Sleep would not come, not here, not now. But stillness did, and for a soldier like her, stillness was enough. As the convoy wound closer to the fortress, the stars began to pale, the faintest edge of dawn creeping across the horizon. The desert shifted from black to gray, the air sharpening with the cold bite of morning. And in that fragile silence, the fortress loomed larger, a shadow against the birth of light, its guns waiting, its soldiers restless. The impossible had already been done, but dawn would demand more. The first light of dawn spilled across the desert in thin, pale strokes, brushing the fortress walls with a ghostly glow. It was the kind of light that made the world seem fragile, balanced between the darkness that had ruled the night and the full blaze of day still waiting to rise. Soldiers said dawn was when fear was loudest, when the cold crept into your bones and the silence before battle grew unbearable. In that silence, Lyra Navarro lay flat against the rocky ridge the general had assigned to her, her rifle steady, her scope sweeping the ground below. The fortress sprawled before her like a wound carved into the earth, its walls jagged, its towers bristling with weapons. Even from this distance, she could see the faint shadows of men moving along the parapets, hear the muted clang of metal as they prepared for the coming assault. She had no illusions. This was not going to be clean. The convoy had halted miles back, staging their forces in staggered positions to avoid detection. Bravo's squad was hidden in the dry channels of the riverbed, Echo nestled among jagged ridges, Delta spread across dunes to the west. Their role was clear: converge at her signal, striking the walls from multiple points while artillery hammered the outer defenses. But artillery alone would never be enough. The fortress was designed to endure. The key was timing, coordination, and above all, precision. That was why she was here. Her scope swept across the walls again, marking targets one by one, a machine gun nest disguised behind steel shutters, a tower with its slit angled toward the approach channels, a communications array perched near the eastern wall. Each one was a weak point, but each one would only stay exposed for seconds at a time. Seconds were enough for her. Through her comms, the general's voice came steady, a low growl of resolve. We strike at first full light. Navarro, call your targets. No movement until your shot opens the field. Lyra clicked her MIC once. Her heart was slow, steady, as though her body had finally given itself entirely to the rhythm of the mission. There was no room for nerves anymore. She had spent her life training for moments like this, moments where one bullet could shift the course of an entire operation. The impossible shot she had taken in the night had already cracked the myth of the fortress. Now, she would turn the crack into a fracture. She steadied her breath, letting the dawn settle around her. The first target revealed itself, the steel shutters of the machine gun nest sliding open as the crew inside checked their field of fire. She adjusted for wind, dialed the distance, and squeezed. The round punched through the opening before the shutters could close, striking the gunner squarely, the recoil jerking his weapon useless. The nest fell silent. Lyra's voice came flat over the comms. Nest down. Move. In an instant, the desert erupted. Bravo's squad surged from the riverbed, Echo unleashed rockets from the ridges, Delta rolled forward across the dunes. Artillery shells screamed overhead, slamming into the walls in concussive bursts. The fortress roared alive in return, its guns spitting fire, traces carving the dawn into chaos. But in that chaos, Lyra's scope remained steady, her rifle dictating the rhythm of the battlefield. Every time a machine gunner lifted his weapon, she dropped him. Every time a tower opened fire, she punched through the slit, silencing it. Soldiers cursed over comms, shouted orders, screamed in pain. But through it all, her voice came calm, measured, unbroken. Tower down. Gunner left wall neutralized. Array compromised. Each call signaled a shift, her bullets opening gaps for squads to advance, her precision cutting the enemy's coordination to pieces. She had become the eye of the storm, the unseen force breaking the fortress from the outside. Yet the fortress did not crumble easily. Its defenders were fierce, disciplined, fueled by desperation and rage at the death of their leader. Rockets slammed into Echo's ridge, shaking the ground, sending dust cascading over her scope. She brushed it clear, adjusted, and struck the crew before they could reload. Mortars thumped from within the walls, shells raining onto Bravo's position, tearing craters into the dry earth. She shifted, found the faint flash of the mortar team between volleys, and dropped them one by one. Still, for every gun silenced, another roared awake. It was like cutting heads from a hydra, endless, relentless. But her hands did not falter. The general's voice came harder now, clipped through static. Navarro, eastern wall is folding. Keep pressure. We breach in 5. She shifted, lining the scope to the array she had marked earlier. Its antenna pulsed faintly, transmitting commands, coordinating the chaos. She knew if it stayed up, the fortress would hold. She adjusted, compensated for the rising heat shimmer as the sun climbed, and squeezed. The round split the array in a shower of sparks, its transmission cut short. Across the comms, she heard the surge of energy in the voices of her comrades. We're in. Breach, breach, breach. The assault crashed into the walls, soldiers scaling ladders, explosives ripping through gates. The fortress shuddered under the onslaught, smoke curling upward in thick black plumes. Lyra's position gave her no rest. She kept firing, covering each push, ensuring that every opening widened instead of closing. Her magazine clicked empty, she swapped it without hesitation, the movement so ingrained it felt like breathing. Another click, another shot, another target down. The battle was endless seconds strung together, each one balanced between victory and ruin. Then, through her scope, she saw something different. A squad of enemy soldiers, better armed, better armored, breaking from the inner courtyard. They weren't defending. They were moving fast, coordinated, toward one of the breach points. Their target was clear, to cut off Bravo's squad as they poured through the shattered gate. If they succeeded, the momentum of the entire assault would collapse. Lyra tracked them, calculating. At this distance, even her precision could not cut them all before they reached the breach. She could drop 3, maybe 4, but the rest would push through. Unless she broke them another way. Her scope swept the courtyard, her mind searching. Then she saw it, a fuel cache, barrels stacked carelessly along the wall, half concealed under tarps. She shifted aim, adjusted for wind, and fired. The bullet pierced the thin steel of the nearest barrel, igniting with a roar that swallowed the squad in flame. The explosion tore the courtyard apart, fire cascading across the stone. Through the smoke, figures stumbled, screaming, consumed. The breach held. Her comms erupted with cheers and curses of disbelief. Ramirez's voice cut through, breathless. You just saved Bravo's asses. Remind me never to stand near anything flammable when you've got eyes on. But there was no time for celebration. The fortress still fought, its defenders clinging to every corner, every room, every hallway. The general's voice thundered through the channel. Push. Do not give them time to regroup. Navarro, eyes sharp. This is where they break. Lyra exhaled, her scope finding yet another target, her finger curling steady on the trigger. Dawn was no longer pale. The sun had risen fully now, spilling gold across the battlefield, glinting against smoke and steel. The fortress that had once seemed untouchable was bleeding from 100 wounds. And through it all, one truth remained steady in Lyra's mind: nothing was impossible. Not the shot through glass. Not the blockade. Not the walls before her. With every pull of the trigger, she proved it again. The fire still burned in the courtyard, sending black smoke spiraling into the bright morning sky. Through her scope, Lyra could see Bravo's squad pushing hard through the breach, their silhouettes moving quickly, hugging the walls, firing bursts to keep the defenders from organizing. The explosion she had ignited had not only destroyed the enemy squad but also ripped open a path into the heart of the fortress. Now, the real fight began, the bloody grind of close-quarters combat where stone walls amplified every shot, and every corner could conceal death. Her role shifted as the soldiers surged inside. From the ridge, she could no longer cover every move. Instead, she became their anchor, cutting down defenders before they could pour fire on the breach, silencing towers that still spat defiance, and watching for hidden movements across the walls. Her scope swept constantly, her mind working faster than her pulse, calculating angles, predicting movements. She had become the unseen guardian above them, and they trusted her without hesitation. The general's voice crackled through her comms, heavy with the sound of battle behind him. "Navarro, we're inside the first ring. Keep our roof clear. We hold this courtyard, and the fortress is ours." Lyra acknowledged with a click. She swept the battlements again and caught the glint of a sniper's scope. Her instincts fired before her thoughts did. She shifted, led the target by a fraction, and squeezed. Her round shattered his position, the figure crumpling behind stone. She kept moving. Another tower spat machine gun fire at Echo's approach. She adjusted, dropped the gunner before his burst could find its mark. Every shot she made bought seconds, and in those seconds her squad mates advanced another step deeper into the stronghold. Minutes bled into an hour, the fight a blur of dust, smoke, and thunder. The sun climbed higher, baking the stone until it shimmered with heat. Sweat stung her eyes, but she ignored it, focused only on the rhythm of aim and fire, aim and fire. Her magazines dwindled, each reload done with hands that never faltered, even when the ground shook with artillery strikes or when screams pierced her comms. She had learned long ago that fear had no place in the scope. Then a new sound split the battlefield, a low, mechanical roar, deeper than guns, angrier than rockets. She turned her scope toward the fortress gates just in time to see them grind open. What emerged made her blood tighten. An armored vehicle, thickly plated, its turret bristling with heavy cannons. Not a relic, not a scrap heap piece of rust, but a beast of modern war hidden inside these ancient walls. It rolled forward, treads chewing stone, its turret already turning toward Bravo's squad clustered in the courtyard. The comms erupted in panic. "Armor! Armor! They've got a damn tank in here." Bravo's voices were sharp with fear. Even Echo, hardened veterans, cursed at the sight. The general's order came, steel wrapped in urgency. "Navarro, find me a weakness. That thing tears the courtyard apart, we're done." Her scope darted across the vehicle, searching. Its armor was thick, plating scarred but intact. Standard rounds would bounce uselessly. Rockets could crack it, but the squads were too exposed to close distance. It had to be her. She breathed slowly, narrowing her focus. Tanks always had a weakness. Vision slits. Exhaust vents. Ammunition racks poorly shielded. She tracked its movement, her mind mapping every angle. Then she saw it, a small exhaust port near the turret's base, pulsing faintly with heat.